So AI and academic writing. So this is also open discussion, so feel free to interject and discuss as we go along. So this is a paper that came out last week, I think, where it's a very short commentary, basically, where they're sort of again like giving these ideas about how we should be thinking about using AI tools to develop the writer rather than develop the writing. Sort of where this really comes from then is, writing is the most important skill an academic can probably have, but it's also often neglected, right? I mean, our scientific careers heavily rely on writing. So this is publications, this is grant applications. I think one of my comments there is if your research is never published, did it ever happen? I mean, so I'm very big on publishing whatever we can. I mean, it's got to be high quality, of course, but negative results should be published, small studies should be published. Saying that, maybe there's some projects that won't go anywhere, and that's completely fine to drop those. But if you do get some research that's close to being published, we should really be finishing that off. So then, writing is hard work, because when you're writing effectively, you've got to, have this combination of clear thinking. You've got to have good organizational skills, so you're pulling together various data resources, various literature pieces. You have to write concisely, but at the same time, you've got to provide a lot of detail on what you write. So you've got to be concise, but also comprehensive. And of course, this is further compounded by, so I'm encouraging everyone to publish, but that puts a lot more pressure on the publication system because, there's more researchers, less people want to do reviews. So it becomes even harder work. Like you've got to modify your writing style to fit a journal. If you don't get accepted into that, you then have to modify that again for the next journal, etc. And again, it gets further compounded where you think in the context that there's actually very little formal training in writing as well. So mostly this is ad hoc mentoring and learning by doing. So I think Brian unfortunately couldn't make it today because he's got his finals, but when he was writing his thesis, I didn't really, again, this is my failing as a mentor, I didn't really tell him how to do it. I just said, write a thesis, right? And then there was a lot of feedback from me as he got me his first draft, so we could have probably preempted that a bit more by providing better structure at the start. So of course, this does then lead into there's a whole bunch of literature around how do we write? And like these are just a series of books that I've read on this topic, which I think I'd recommend to you guys to read. I have them in my office too, if people do want to read them. So really the first one's like sort of about how do we take notes? So this is based off what is the method called? Because it's a German word. The Zettelkasten method. And this is actually from one of the most prolific sociologists. Like he basically had a whole drawer full of notes and each note connected to another note. And basically he'll go through like, okay, what do I want to write about today? And just pull out notes and basically integrate those into a paper and then go through and do the editing. And he wrote like 3,000 papers, like using this approach like in the 18th century. So there's a whole bunch of like digital tools that built around this method now. So basically having these integrated notes. How to write a lot is basically saying have a writing schedule, set aside time each day to write, rather than trying to leave things until the last minute, right? You want to build things up slowly. The reader's brain is more about so they're using neuroscience to identify how people read and using that. Yeah.
Can I just, for the book before, so you said it's better to write every day.
Yeah, so you're setting up a schedule. Yeah.
But how long? Because for me, like if I'm like, okay, I'm going to write today, I need a long time.
Yeah.
I cannot, some people that, okay, you should just take at least 30 minutes, 1 hour. But for me, it seems that it's not enough when I need to write. It's so complicated that I need, long.
So
if you have to do that every day.
So I normally do like a 2-hour block. So like it'll be like 8 to 10. So that's when I'm less likely to be interrupted by other people, when I don't generally have meetings. I actually work better on the East Coast because them on the West Coast, there's a lot of East Coast meetings in that time now. But it's also working out what you want to write about that day. So it's not just writing itself, but it's also like sometimes you got to do literature reading. Sometimes it might be making a graphic, but basically having a goal, whether this is a grant or a paper, having a schedule each day to work on that. And working gradually over time rather than trying to leave things to the last minute. People say, I'm going to go on a sabbatical and finish this paper. Look, you're wasting your holidays. maybe we should have actually scheduled that writing earlier on so we don't have to. That's sort of the argument they make in that book. Yeah, then the reader's brain is about, as I said, where they've used neuroscience to identify how people actually read, using this to inform how we should be structuring papers. So like there's their 5 C's, so clarity, coherence, continuity, cadence, I can't remember what the last one is. Biomedical writer, which is one that I'm reading now, this is just an extension of that first book, but more focused on, how do you structure a manuscript or a grant application, and how do you preempt reviewers' comments. So the idea then is that because writing's hard, these AI tools possibly offer a way to accelerate this process of academic writing. Probably heard of most of these, ChatGPT, which is the one that really took off December last year. Microsoft now has their version called Bing, and then Google's making their own version called Bard. And I said, I've been using this fairly regularly. So this is a tweet I put out in December 2nd, where I was addressing reviewers' comments for a review at the time. And one of them said we should talk about this trade-off between deep phenotyping versus having larger data sets with less well-phenotyped cohorts. And ChatGPT did a pretty good, wrote a pretty good summary of that. Personally, I've been using it to respond to reviewers' comments. I've been using it to generate grant ideas. So you're sort of giving it my ideas and getting feedback. Writing comments when I'm reviewing papers, so not giving the paper I'm reviewing to ChatGPT, but I'll go through and take all my notes and sort of feed those to ChatGPT to at least improve the language, because I did tend to write very terse, horrible notes. So having some nicer language around that's useful. Administrative forms, some forms they want your 200-word summary of the research you want if you're doing a data request. So I just feed it my abstract from a grant and say, make this 200 words. I mean, admin forms are useful, right? Drafting emails. But the main takeaway is I predominantly use it as a copy editor, right? So I'm not so much using it to generate text like I've done in this tweet here, but to give a text I've written and getting feedback on that. But before we get into this, maybe we should actually describe what these large language models are and sort of how they work. So basically the idea is that these companies have basically scraped the entire web. So, getting patents, Wikipedia, publicly accessible papers, Stack Overflow, so forums. They scrape all this together and they generally put it into a neural network. This neural network then basically identifies the statistical correlations between words. So based on a given prompt that you give it, what words are likely to come after this? I should say it's actually not words, it's tokens. So you can think of a token as a word, but for instance, unhappiness could be broken down to 2 tokens, so un and happiness. And then so the large language model then, based on these tokens, work out which token is likely to come after each other token based on your prompt. And then this is trained by reinforcement learning, where they have real people put in prompts and then basically review them. Does this make sense or not? So they reinforce what the neural network is learning itself. So how we should be thinking about these large language models. So here's a couple of examples. So basically it's a blurry JPEG of all the text on the web. So the idea here is that if we wanted to have a whole copy of the internet, we can't do that, right? We just can't put a copy on our laptop. It's too large. So basically what you want to do is you want to compress it and make it smaller. But in doing that, you're losing the detail. So ChatGPT is essentially a blurry JPEG where you've got this highly compressed version of the internet and you give it questions and it answers based on this model. The other way to think about it is also as being a stochastic parrot. So ChatGPT doesn't understand the meaning of what it's giving to you. It's just based on these stochastic factors, repeating what it's learned. So, and this is sort of where this idea of hallucinations comes in, right? So it doesn't know the exact answer, but it's guessing what the answer would be based on this neural network model. So it's a parrot, it's a blurry JPEG. So because the text that it spits out is generally pretty good, maybe it will become a crutch for scientists as we go forward. So people will be tempted to, put in their hypothesis or their research question in ChatGPT and then use the text that it gives you without thinking about what you're getting out of it. So then this paper sort of thinking about how can we actually then use these generative AI tools to assist in sort of 3 domains, brainstorming and experimental design, structuring scientific manuscripts, and then drafting and revising, which is predominantly what I've been using it for. Do you have any other questions or comments before we go on from there? Pretty straightforward. We're all experts in large language models now. So that's my basic understanding. Like, I don't do machine learning, but from what I was reading, that's sort of, and what ChatGPT told me. So then, what this paper is basically then arguing is that we want to use second language acquisition principles in the context of these large language models. So when we want to learn a second language, we do better if we are slightly challenged beyond our current skill levels. So you first start off learning, say, hello world, but then you sort of progressively ramp this up to more complex ideas. You need to actively then pay attention to the features of the language that you're learning. So you can't just, again, like repeat what you're told. You have to understand how the grammar and stuff works. So you've got to actively learn. You then tend to learn better if you are in a community where this language is spoken. So I learned Spanish a lot better when I was living in Mexico, because I was, again, in a situation where I had to learn Spanish. And then engaging in this meaningful interaction with others to internalize that language. Again, this is social interaction. So by repeatedly using it, you're internalizing what you've learned. So basically, it's sort of problematic when we use AI tools to say improve and revise the following, like I've done in this grant application here. I just gave it a paragraph of text, it's revised it, but what did I actually learn from this? Why has this tool made the revisions that it has? Like, I've got no idea. So this is sort of, again, like a problematic use.
Why is it problematic to do that?
So it's because you're not learning from it. So it's making the changes, but you don't understand why it's making changes.
For example, if you want to improve, because you're not an English native speaker, how do you do that?
So this is where it comes down. You want to then have an interactive chat with it. So you're asking it, why have you made these changes?
So we do that in the first step, and then why did you do that?
Yeah. So we'll see some better prompts later on where they're suggesting how to embed this interactive nature into it. But basically saying this, just improve and revise the following is not a good prompt because you're not using this as an opportunity to learn. You're just regurgitating what ChatGPT is giving you. And for me, this is at my career stage, it's probably better, or more okay, because I've had 10 years of writing, so I sort of developed my own writing style. So I generally don't use what ChatGPT gives me word for word. I'll use it to inform my own writing. But that's because I've had 10 years worth of experience writing papers and stuff
because
like that.
I did that, so I'm using since 1 week because we talked about it. So I did it for some emails.
Yeah.
And I'm not using directly what he's giving to me, but I'm just taking some sentence on some form I like. Yeah. I'm like, okay, this seems nice, and I'm taking, but I'm not taking
the whole thing. Yeah. So that's generally what I've been doing too. I think for emails, I think it's different too because it's an email.
Yeah.
But for when you're writing papers or grants, again, maybe you want to think about learning why it's making the changes suggested.
But also to decide if that is, how do you decide if that is actually a good change or not?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So that's where it's the experience for me, right? So, so I don't like it because maybe it's stylistically, I just don't like the writing style. And that's why you want to have this interactive session with it to start understand why it's making those changes and whether you agree with that change. Yeah. So it's like thinking about what it's giving you rather than just regurgitating.
Like rather than just accepting, okay, this is clearly better than what I wrote.
Yeah.
But why would it be better?
Yes, exactly.
And we have to always talk to him like it's a human and it's a normal conversation, and you have to explain.
Exactly.
Does anyone else do that? Where I always say please. I can't stop doing it. Keep thinking that it's a real person. please can you shorten this?
Right, yeah. So when ChatGPT takes over the world, it's going to like you because you've been nice and polite, and I'll be on the hit list because I just like improve and revise. Yeah, so and that's what we're talking about, prompt engineering. So developing prompts that sort of guide this feedback. And again, this paper that sort of break this down into individual components. So first of all, you generally want to assign a role. So if you're writing a paper, maybe you want to say like you're an editor at Nature or you're an editor at JAMA Neurology. If you're doing a grant application, maybe you want to say you're an expert in neurology and you're a reviewer on an NIA study section, for instance. So you're assigning that identity at the start. You then want to clearly define an objective. So maybe this is shortening the text that you're going to give it. Maybe this is improving spelling and grammar, for example. And then you want to specify what your context and constraints are. So maybe you want to, there's a particular writing style you want to use, or there's particular grammatical things you want to focus on. And then, as I was saying, the fourth thing is refining the output through conversation. So understanding what the changes are and getting to explain further. So then some common pitfalls that we have in prompt engineering then is, first of all, got like ambiguity. So where it sort of lacks specificity on what you want it to do. So this could be just saying, hey, can you write a paragraph on the role of technology in society, right? That's incredibly broad and ambiguous. It's not going to give you very specific feedback. You also have to be careful about, what biases you put into your prompts. So you could say, why are women worse at leadership roles, right? I mean, that's then reinforcing a bias that probably doesn't exist in real world, right? So you've got to be careful about what you're putting into the prompt itself. But then you don't want to be overly specific. I mean, maybe in some cases you do, because you want to ask a very specific question, like, what's the role of Emily Bader in Alzheimer's disease in the context of physical activity, right? Maybe you want to have something specific to that, but you've got to be careful. You may be locking out potential useful information that, if you broaden the prompt a little bit, that could also be useful for what you're trying to do. So again, like lack of context. So providing it some information about what you're actually trying to do, or the context in which you're using this information. So is it for a grant application? Is it for a manuscript? So unintended side effects. This is when you make really complex prompts with conflicting instructions. So this can result in giving nonsensical answers. So again, you want to have concise and clear text. Again, ethical considerations. This is more, how are we using AI? Are we using it for good? Are we asking it to, again, like reinforce biases that are existing? So you do it for social good, I guess. I mean, I think we'd all be doing that as researchers, but I don't know, maybe some people aren't. And then understanding what the limits on these models are. So as we said, at the start, because they're stochastic parrots, you can't take everything it says, at face value, right? So you've got to use critical evaluation for what it's responding to you with. Right. So then the first example of how you can use AI then is brainstorming and experimental design. So this is basically where you're using this series of interactive prompts to brainstorm these ideas related to a given research project. So we can ask questions about literature and methodological approaches. So for instance, the RO3 I'm writing at the moment, we want to measure mitochondrial biomass. So I asked it at one stage, how do we do this? And some of this feedback wasn't particularly great, but at least it got me thinking about different approaches. And again, so then you can contrast these ideas with your own knowledge, because it could be identifying gaps in your own knowledge that could be useful to address. And again, it sort of emotes this idea of social interaction. If you don't mind speaking to a computer, maybe you should be interacting with your colleagues more than the computer itself. But again, like if you just want to refine your idea and identify what gaps are in the literature, this offers a way to do that. And again, because you're having this interactive nature, you're promoting this internalization of knowledge, right? So maybe it gives you a particular idea that you haven't thought of, then you can ask it for more details as these can sort of go down that rabbit hole. And again, like iteratively designing experiments by asking for feedback. So you could give it, this is the experimental design I have, what gaps are there in the experiment, and maybe we'll give you some useful, maybe not. So this is the example I give. I'd like to brainstorm for my thesis topic. The general topic I'm interested in is, could you please take on the role of a research advisor and ask me questions to help me brainstorm a project? So, it could then ask you questions about mitochondrial copy number or mitochondrial function, and then you could sort of follow up, based on these ideas, could you give some bullet points? And maybe you could take this to Christine or me, and they'll be very impressed with us.
Have you tried this?
I haven't tried this one, no. So, I sort of started off with, in fact, I've got an example here of one that I did. So what is compensatory upregulation of mitochondrial DNA? And then, so, gave me a very brief idea of what it is. And then, my follow-up was, can you provide some references on papers that examine this topic? I think it gave me 5 papers here that actually weren't super useful.
Do you have the experience of it making up citations?
Oh, so for this one, I'm using a plugin called Scholar AI. So it's actually directly querying PubMed. So all these citations are real.
Okay, because that seems like a real limitation of like asking it to summarize literature. It'll just make up stuff.
Yeah. So for the
What was it called?
Scholar AI. So I've got the paid version of ChatGPT. So with that, you have plugins that you can then use it. So you. Yeah.
Because once I tried to ask him for a specific article, and he answered like, "Oh no, I can't." Say, okay, you understood.
Yeah.
I finished my.
Yeah.
Like I asked him like, "Can you give me an article about this?" And he just replied like, "Oh no, I can't. I can't have access to internet." And okay.
I
don't know how to explain.
Sometimes the links they give you don't actually work. Like they'll be like, "Oh, this page is not found" or something.
It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It just makes up what it thinks the most likely link
Yeah.
is. It doesn't like check it.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you could ask it to. I don't know, but
Yeah. So like another plugin they have is like a link reader, so you can actually give it a link to a paper and then get it to summarize it. Or another one is like upload the PDF and then you'll read directly from the PDF. So I have given it a copy of my thesis from my PhD and asked it to summarize it, and did a decent job. We then used that to make prompts for Midjourney to make a graphic for my thesis. I'll show that later, actually. So get that up. So yes, this is an example of how we can use it to brainstorm ideas.
Does that mean also we can ask it to, I don't know, do tables and anything?
I haven't tried asking it to do tables.
like data visualizations.
Yeah. So you can use it for coding. So I've played around with that, like more to give it code chunks I've written, like in R, and asking it, because I'm running into errors. Like, this is the error I'm getting. This is my code. What's going on? It's been actually pretty decent at debugging. But when I was doing power calculations for a grant for linear mixed effects models for longitudinal change over time, it made shit up. It was making up packages that didn't exist, and like I had an idea of how I wanted to do it, but I thought, is there another way I could be doing this rather than using a simulation-based approach?
Did you find a good method?
Yeah, simulations basically, because I have my underlying. So I've got the NAC data set, and I just made 2 predictors, just as a normal distribution. So if I plug these into this model, what effect size can I detect? The reviewers seem to find that okay. Our calculations are mostly bullshit. So as long as that makes reasonable sense, I don't think the reviewers question it too much. But one of my previous grants I had, it was a terrible power calculation, and they picked up on it. So long as it seems like you've done a decent job, and not something very hacky like I did in that first grant where I just didn't want to do a power calculation. But reviewers do care about it. Yeah, so structure of scientific writing is sort of the next one. And basically this is just using it to provide templates and outlines for examples that you can adhere to for like certain conventions. So again, so saying, hey, I want to write a paper for Nature. What are the broad sections I should be using and what should I be talking about each section, for instance? You can then also provide it with your own outline to get feedback on what you've written. Again, like this is fostering understanding of how these documents are organized. So example again of their system prompt is like you're a manuscript reviewer for Nature. I need to generate an outline for a manuscript. Can you please provide me with guidance on what information I should include in the outline? And then you're following it up. So here's my outline based on your feedback. Can you offer some suggestions on how to improve the organization? And how do your suggestions actually improve the paper? So again, not just taking it, and not just taking the suggestions at face value, but getting to explain why it's made the suggestions. So again, this is one I did yesterday. So for journal clubs in the future, I was asking people to sort of use this nature research briefing structure. So where they have like these 4 major sections, the problem, the observation, the implications, and behind that paper section. But Nature doesn't actually tell you what's meant to go into these sections on their author guidelines. So I just asked ChatGPT, hey, can you give me some points I should be discussing each of these sections? And again, it does a good job, providing a concise overview of the topic, a detailed description of the key findings, the interpretation from the paper, etc. And then for journal clubs, we probably wouldn't have the behind the paper section since we didn't actually write the paper, but sort of those 3 topics that sort of give a good overview of what the paper's about, and would promote the discussion of those findings in a journal club. So I don't know if you guys have had the experience, at least back in Mount Sinai, when we did journal clubs, we would just pick down to the smallest details in the methods. We'll basically spend an hour and a half criticizing the paper. And it becomes very tedious, and I hate it. So having the structure of, focusing on the implications of the results rather than what the actual specific methods they've used are, I think it's sort of more informative. And you sort of bring this back into the research we're doing as a group and how we can use this ourselves. And then again, like the final section is like drafting and revising manuscripts. So this is what I've mostly used it for. So again, like the idea is to provide feedback on early manuscript drafts to improve writing quality while retaining creative control.
But for example, you are just copying and paste the whole manuscript to ChatGPT?
Not normally the whole manuscript. Normally,
just some paragraph.
Like the paragraph I'm working on the time, or maybe it'd be a section, so like maybe the introduction. So ChatGPT can't handle a whole manuscript at this stage. Like it's got a limit on the number of tokens you can upload. So I don't know what the exact words are, but like you can give it a specific same page, like it can handle that, but it probably wouldn't handle the whole research strategy section, for instance. So generally you're submitting sections in your manuscript to obtain suggestions on clarity, coherence, organization, and again asking it to explain the reasoning behind the suggestion changes and why these changes improve the manuscript quality. Again, so then we're promoting this active engagement. But again, the important thing is not to just rely on ChatGPT, but to bring it back to your peers and collaborators. So people in my lab should be, of course, bringing their manuscripts to me so I can then provide feedback on that, but also talking more broadly with other people in the group. Because again, like ChatGPT doesn't have the domain expertise that we have. So again, like this is the system prompt it starts with. You're an editor of a scientific journal. I have a draft of my manuscript. Can you please review this draft and suggest where clarity or coherence can be improved, for instance? And again, following up on this, explaining why it made these suggestions and how the suggestions make the draft more clear or coherent. So this is, again, an example of one that I've been using for my RO3. And this is sort of going back into that Reader's Brain book I was talking about earlier. So saying, like, this is the writing style I want to use. So saying, you are a reviewer for the NIA, and you're going to be reviewing my RO3 application. Your task is to identify areas where the draft could be improved in terms of clarity, continuity, coherence, concision, and/or cadence, based on Yellowy Douglas's The Reader Brain. And once you've provided a summary of your role, I've asked it to then basically say begin, and then I give it my whole specific games page, and then I can go through it a paragraph at a time to get an understanding of those suggestions. Actually, maybe I can screen sharing is paused. That's okay. After we go through the presentation, I can go to my ChatGPT page and we can go through some of these examples. So how are publishers thinking about generative AI then? So Nature put out their statement, so these will not be accredited as an author. And again, this makes sense because authors have to be responsible for what they've written. ChatGPT can't be responsible for anything because it's not a person. But also, if you're using these tools, you should be documenting their use in the methods or the acknowledgement sections. I haven't had this yet, but I was talking to another colleague about a paper they were submitting through editorial manager, and specifically asked, to what extent was this text generated by AI and what percentage? So I don't think there's any hard and fast policies at the moment, but you should be thinking, if you are using AI to generate text, how is this going to be reported? Because there are AI detection tools, apparently they're not great, and there's other tools that will hide that you've used AI. If we're using it just for spelling and grammar, is that actually text that has been generated by that AI? Is it just a spell check? So I don't think anyone's sort of really worked this out yet. But maybe in the acknowledgement section, you probably should be saying, yeah, maybe a large language model tool was used for these specific tasks. Like, when we are accrediting authors in the acknowledgement section, saying, like, I drafted the manuscript or I devised the hypothesis, maybe we should be saying, what ChatGPT or Bing or Bard was actually used for. So sure, it was used to spell check or provide revisions, but it wasn't used to actually generate text, for instance. And then, maybe will publishers start using these tools to do reviews of manuscripts due to reviewers turning down. Again, you see on Twitter that editors, having to contact 20, 30 people before they can get someone to review a paper. Last year, I was the single reviewer on a paper, and that was when I was moving, so it took me 3 months to review that paper. So, and that's not fair on the authors then, because it took them 3 months before I did, but I was thinking, there has to be other authors, they'll just cut me out, or sorry, other reviewers, they'll just cut me out, but they didn't because I was the only one, right? So, if they don't have to pay, they have to pay ChatGPT, right? So Elsevier can get more inflated profits if they use ChatGPT, maybe. So of course, there's some other concerns, like if we're using these IA languages, would this lead to uniformity in language? So would your voice as a writer be homogenized? Because ChatGPT is like on Wikipedia, that has a very certain writing style. So are you losing your own voice? I think that's something you've got to think about in how you use the data from ChatGPT. I think this way, focusing on suggestions about how you can improve clarity is more useful than necessarily you taking what they've given you for that, again, at face value. There are some concerns around plagiarism, particularly if it's been learned or learning from a particular text and you don't know if it's essentially plagiarized that. So it may be then picked up in, if you're at a university through Turnitin. I think these editorial tools are also using Turnitin maybe. UCSF itself doesn't have any explicit policies on how these tools should be used beyond do not upload sensitive data to them, because that could be retained by OpenAI or Google or Bing, for instance. So don't give it data. Again, like a manuscript is probably fine because that's not patient health information, but definitely don't upload a CSV of patient data to it. So how should we be thinking about these tools, at least in my lab? I encourage you to use them. I'm fine with you using them, but again, using it to develop your own writing style rather than using it as a way to generate text. So starting with structure, providing it with an outline that you've generated and getting feedback on how this outline could be improved for coherence, for instance. drafting and revising. So again, like you should be writing your own initial draft of your own manuscripts or documents, and then using these tools to, again, like revise for clarity, coherence, etc. And again, critically evaluate the output that it gives you. Don't take it at face value. It can provide useful insights, but you have to ensure that the final document meets the quality and relevance for the applications that you're giving it. Yeah, that's sort of where things finish off. So yeah, does anybody else have any thoughts about this?
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Didn't
This
know
is
we
super
can.
helpful.